be like, action. Hi, my name is Xavier Tzintzun. I'm a UW student, and this project specifically focusing on the gentrification of queer spaces in Seattle, specifically Capitol Hill. So this story starts off with my background. So I'm a first-generation student at the University of Washington, studying business, but I'm really excited to start talking about this topic, considering that I come from the Yakama Indian Reservation, where there isn't a lot of queer representation. As a Latino, as a person of color, there's a lot of factors that go into that representation being represented. We're already in an underrepresented community as it is, with the majority of the population being Latinos, Native Americans, and a few Caucasian white people. But with that being said, you know, there's a lot of cultural factors that go into people being out and that representation being seen on the reservation. With that being said, often when I was growing up as a queer individual, I didn't see a lot of that representation. A lot of people were probably closeted. I was closeted. So when I thought of coming to Seattle, I thought of Seattle being a really liberal place. I thought of Seattle as a space where queer individuals were very much represented, where it was very accepted, and it was very much 50 steps ahead of back home. 50 steps ahead of back home regarding representation of queer individuals and that being accepted. I think that coming into Capitol Hill as an outsider, I thought of it as the neighborhood. I knew of it as the neighborhood. And to me, that was something that I didn't necessarily see at home a lot. That was very liberal, that was very progressive, that was very much what I thought it would be. And I thought that was enough. So after living here for a year and a half as a UW student, I noticed that there's actually a lot more work to be done. I took some time to talk to some individuals in the Seattle space, in the Capitol Hill space, and in the Seattle queer community in general. So my goal with this project is to highlight their voices, highlight their experience, highlight my experience as a queer individual, as somebody that comes from the Yakama Indian Reservation and isn't in a way an outsider, but also back that up with data supporting it. I would like to just ask you if you can just introduce yourself, you know, your name, pronouns, and if you don't mind, like how long you've resided in Seattle.
Sure. My name's Kriya Velasco. I use any pronouns really, and I don't have a preference for what pronouns you want to use for me. And I've lived in Seattle since 2016, so this is my 6th year. I had previously heard of Capitol Hill as like the gay neighborhood in Seattle, and I was wondering what it was all about. The first thing that greeted me was like the rainbow crosswalks. Like that's what people mostly remember also is like, oh yeah, the rainbow crosswalks.
You know, like over your time in Seattle, like what have queer spaces like meant to you?
I moved to Capitol Hill to live in an apartment in the Pine Triangle in 2016 and lived there for a couple of years with my younger brother, who's straight. In the 2 years that I lived there, I felt that the rainbow crosswalks were supplemented with rainbow flags on restaurant displays. So to me, it felt like people were saying, oh, queer people are safe here. Seeking out queer spaces is definitely important for me as a queer person. I tried to do it in Capitol Hill and tried to do it in the University of Washington, but it feels like it was still short of what I was expecting. I want to refer back to our conversation or the topic of rainbow flags, because I think in academia we call it virtue signaling, right? Like putting up flags, whether in a classroom or at the Q Center or like your cubicle if you're a counselor or advisor to students, or restaurants or coffee shops in Capitol here in Seattle in general. They're signaling that these are the values that we espouse, or that we, values that we sort of try to apply in our work. But also thinking about, for instance, like Pride celebrations and the corporatization of Pride Month, and how every company is like, oh, we're queer friendly and we value our queer employees, and at the same time, they donate to the police. And the police has historically oppressed like queer peoples.
Like I had mentioned before, coming to Capitol Hill, coming to Seattle as an outsider, it seemed very accepting, it seemed very progressive, it seemed very liberal, especially for queer individuals in the LGBTQIA+ community. But upon research, I've noticed that there's a lot of gentrification that is playing into that representation being erased and pushing those individuals that have historically been represented in these spaces. It's pushing them out, and that's really, really unfair. So right behind me, you can see a perfect example of gentrification, of industrialization taking place. For example, this building right here and this whole block down from here is full of modern buildings, new buildings that are made out of apartment complexes. And on this side, you can see that it's very much rural, very much urban. You can basically see it happening right here and now. With that being said, you can see on this side that it's very much a different space and it's not even 50 feet away.
I feel that in the last 10 years, in the place that I lived, Capitol Hill, for the period of 2016 to 2018, was just slowly becoming, for lack of a better term, a haven for tech bros. Microsoft had buses running from Capitol Hill to their offices in Redmond, and a lot of people started to find housing in Capitol Hill.
It's very different seeing this change taking place and this modernization taking place in a space like Capitol Hill. It's very much pushing the people that have historically been here, people that have lived in rural areas like this. It's pushing them out while creating new spaces, new opportunities for people that are coming in with higher wages, new opportunities for people that work for bigger corporations. When I first moved here a year and a half ago, as an outsider, Capitol Hill seemed very diverse, seemed very accepting, seemed very progressive, and the representation in art, the difference in color, murals, and the vibrance of everything seemed very, very progressive. But upon living here a year and a half, it's become more and more apparent that that's very much on the surface level and that the true representation in people and the population isn't really diverse at all.
In terms of gentrification of queer spaces, and like mostly it's a question of affordability of like I think the club that I mentioned, for instance, Rebar, I think has closed down. How do you really create a safe space for queer folks is my question, right? Like, do you just build like a cafe, put some couches and some games, arcade games, put Wi-Fi in there, and then declare that the space is like, oh look, this is a safe space for queer folks? My final words, I guess, is like none of this stuff is new. I like the desire for a cultural shift of acceptance versus tolerance has been around for a while, and yeah, I just feel that it's been around for a while. So these aren't like necessarily my original ideas. And this is the beauty of also being part of the queer community, is like we know that this history has happened, right? Like this is why also studying history is important. The way that I see society and the city of Seattle, for instance, supporting queer folks, whether it's business owners, queer business owners, or like queer youth, for instance, it's gonna have to happen through a cultural shift, right? In the way that we change culture is really going to have to come from schooling, and that's the way that I see it as an educator, is like it's not just about putting queer children's books in curriculum for kindergartners. It's also about changing the curriculum itself so that it allows queer people to be who they are comfortably in any space.
After interviewing Kriya, I realized that the problem of gentrification of queer spaces and those spaces possibly being erased was a lot deeper than that. It was a lot deeper than what I thought it was at first. And ultimately the issue is, I'm gonna get run over! So before I was rudely interrupted, after interviewing Kriya, I realized that the problem of gentrification of queer spaces and those spaces possibly being erased, it was a lot deeper than gentrification, but it was more so about education. And Kriya was actually the one that spoke that in our interview and said that he acknowledged that the problem isn't about gentrification of queer spaces, but rather the fact that safety of queer people and the community is constrained to physical spaces, and that's really where the problem lies. Ultimately, the solution doesn't lie in making wages higher, it doesn't lie in making housing more affordable for other people. It lies in educating the next generation, educating people to be more accepting of the queer community and not just be tolerant of it. It takes all of us, and ultimately it lies within all of us to use our power, our voices, to acknowledge those queer people, acknowledge their history, and call other people out. Call homophobia out, call machismo out, call really, really messed up things out behind closed doors. It takes all of us to have those hard conversations with our family members, with our kids, with the next generation, and with other individuals in order for us to genuinely create change and create a better future for not just us and queer individuals, but for our children. It's cold, we're here with the crew. We hit a pit stop, we got hungry. The crew right here.
You can't do it.
I want to take this moment really quick to acknowledge my production crew. We have Carla right here. We have Bianca behind the camera. What's your experience? What do you think?
I thought it was a fun experience. You know, I'm glad I got to record you and go along the journey with you. Yeah, I got to learn about your topic and why you're so interested in this topic. It was really nice.